This session is designed to help you not only grow your business, but retain your best clients over a very long period of time. One of my inspirations for this talk comes from a book I read as a young person, and it was by Dale Carnegie. It was a book based on insights he developed while teaching at a YMCA in New York City in the 1920s. One of the statements he made in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, resonates with me to this very day. He said, "You will accomplish more developing a sincere interest in others than trying to get others interested in you." I want you to think about that. So often we spend our time in marketing or sales, answering proposals, etc., trying to get people interested in the services we provide as freelancers. But the reality is, if we develop a sincere interest in those prospects and those clients, they'll lock on to us, and we will make the leap from being a good option to becoming an essential partner to their business. Before joining Upwork, I led a research consultancy called Deeper Media, and we studied customer loyalty for every type of business, the very small business like I was running at Deeper Media, all the way to giant enterprises. And what we looked at is the client who said, "I would not switch to another provider, another service provider, another freelancer for any amount of discount, because he or she is essential to my business." And we studied what it meant to be essential. We talked to the clients, they told us, but more importantly, we tracked down and identified those essential service providers, and we talked to them about their intentional skills, the things they always led with in client engagements. And along the way, we've determined there are 3 attributes to the essential partner that separate them from the good option. The first attribute is that the essential partner is a sounding board. They listen more than they talk. They're empathetic to the client's feelings, and the client feels like they've developed rapport and can share their most private thoughts with that provider. The second attribute is that the essential partner is a fountain of knowledge. Every time the client talks to this provider, they learn something. They gain valuable insights for the experience. They come to depend on that service provider, that freelancer, to learn more about the space they're in. Finally, number 3, the essential partner is a connector of dots. And what I mean by that is they don't just take orders. No, these essential providers, they step back and they see the bigger picture. They see what higher order problem the client is really trying to solve. And by addressing that higher order problem, they add a lot more value, make themselves very essential to work with. Now, the point of this session is that it's really competitive out there, as you know, and just being a good option is not a winning strategy. You must make that leap to become that essential partner, that essential independent professional that your clients can't live without. And it also, of course, improves their feedback. It also improves their willingness to give you even bigger and bigger roles inside their organization. Let's go back and let's walk through those 3 attributes. And what I want to do over the course of the next few minutes is give you valuable takeaways, things you can put to use immediately to become that essential partner. Becoming a sounding board is about changing one's paradigm about the concept of listening. Another one of my favorite books I read when I was much younger, I recommend you read this one too, it's great on building up effectiveness acumen, is a book by the late, great Stephen Covey Sr. titled The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the habits he learned most successful people possess is they seek first to understand, then to be understood. Do you notice how that kind of mirrors the Dale Carnegie quote? Think about it. You need to first understand how the client feels, what the client needs, and what the client defines as a successful deliverable before they understand your services, your value proposition, your vision for how you're going to deliver on the job being considered. Seek first to understand. One of my good friends, fellow author Dan Pink, says, listening is not the same thing as waiting for the other person to finish speaking. But we treat it that way. We consider listening something that we kind of tolerate to get through a conversation. But really, if you want to become essential, this is what we've learned in our research, you need to consider listening as one of the most valuable services you deliver as an independent professional. You see, listening is likely the most important communication skill you can ever develop. Let me give you an example, and I think this will resonate with you because you answer job postings all the time with your proposals. Sometimes you have an opportunity to have a live conversation with the prospect. So I just want to show you something. At Deeper Media, we studied the correlation between word count in a conversation. How many words did the seller have versus how many words did the buyer have, and the closing rate on that possibility. We've learned that people that sell by talking, which means they fill most of the conversations by talking, they have a very low closing rate. Take a look at that. But those master sales professionals that listened more than they spoke, in this case, they listened way more than they spoke, are closing over 70% of their opportunities. In other words, many times we talk ourselves out of opportunities to do client work. So I want you to take a couple of the following pieces of advice to heart to sharpen your listening skills. The first thing I want to say is never assume the other is finished sharing their ideas, their problems, their feelings, their challenges. When you have this opportunity to have a live conversation, either phone or video based, with a prospective client, I want you to use what journalists use as a vital tool in extending their answers. To get more detail, use the pregnant pause. You ask a question, they speak, they pause for a second, you feel the urge to fill that space with words. That's what human beings do, according to researchers. But instead of jumping in just because the client stopped, you wait. And oftentimes they resume, but now they resume off script, meaning a lot of times you're not the only person they're talking to. Buyers have a script just like sellers do. Buyers have this mental model of what they're going to reveal to figure out who they're going to hire. But really, there's always more to the story. There's more detail that, as I'll explain later, may reveal to you bigger opportunities. And by using that pregnant pause when they finish the short answer, you get a much longer answer with more and rich detail. In his book, Ask More, this is a great book by Frank Senzo. He's an award-winning journalist and reporter. He says one of the easiest ways to really become a good listener is to learn to ask questions without a question mark. In other words, as somebody tells you something and you feel like you'd like to know the rest of the story, or you want to give them an opportunity to further unpack that need or that project that they're working on, just say this: tell me more. Tell me more is a question without a question mark. And frequently that leads to a person giving you more details. Sometimes you can just say, tell me more, I'm curious. Or you can even ask the question, so I'm curious, and you ask a specific question about what they just told you. And again, you wait and wait and wait until you know they've finished answering the question. And then you play it back to them to prove your listening, and more importantly, get the interactive opportunity to sharpen what you've heard so that either the resulting proposal or the resulting work resonates even more. Here's a couple of ideas about being a better listener. Ask people how they feel about certain things. Oftentimes, when we're talking to a prospective client or even working with a client, we're just like, the facts, the facts, the facts. It determines my work. My time is money. I get off the phone. But really, behind every statement, there's a feeling. And I'll give you an example. So I was working as an independent professional a couple of years ago. I'll give you an example. I was working as an independent professional in a consulting arrangement a few years ago. And I was talking to a marketing leader at a company about a program she had rolled out. And she expressed to me that all of her digital advertising programs were only valued based on the end user clicking on the advertising asset. And that was a decision made by her supervisor in conjunction with the ad agency. So as she was explaining to me, whatever we do is only valuable if it's clicked on, I could just feel like there was more to the story. So then I asked her, well, how does that metric make you feel? And she said, it frustrates me. She says, because I know that when the prospective users of our software, when they see the ad, even if they don't click on the ad, it makes an impression. And in conjunction with everything else we're doing, email marketing to them, event marketing to them, direct sales marketing to them, it helps tip the balance to cause them to try our product. She says, I'm frustrated that our company doesn't value impressions as much as they value clicks. So then I was able to modify my service offering to say, what if we did a measurement of impressions and then looked later at whether those actual users converted? Not because they clicked on your ad, but because later they came back through your commerce door and downloaded your software. She said, let's try it. It ended up being a way that she was able to convince her supervisor and her agency to begin to value impressions. And what did that mean? She was able to open up even more advertising opportunities, further driving the success of their program. But it didn't happen till I asked her, how does that make you feel? And let me mention one more thing. When you do start having conversations with people about how they feel, understand empathy is really important. In other words, feelings are facts. When I try to see things from your point of view and you're vulnerable enough to tell me how you feel about a situation, I can't pass judgment on that feeling. I can't say that you shouldn't feel that way. You should be grateful. You shouldn't feel that way for whatever reason. I should learn to accept that as a fact. It's the way you feel. And if nothing else, feel it with you for a minute. Or in my case, let her play that out and try to offer a solution that respects her feelings. The last thing I'll say about being a sounding board is that we lose the small talk so often, especially during years like 2020, and we just try to get down to business. Take a minute to ask people a little bit more about their business or even more about what they're doing or where they're talking to you from, and listen to their personal details with a sense of interest, because as you get to know people, guess what? They get to know you too. They open up to you, and you build a better relationship. The second attribute to talk about here is becoming the fountain of knowledge. What we mean by this is that every time you have a conversation with a prospect or a client, they gain valuable insights from the time they invest talking to you. Think about this video you're watching right now. You're investing time in it. You're investing almost a half hour in listening to me. So I know that I need to give you actionable items like I just did around listening, things you can actually put to work right away. Guess what? You need to do that too. That's what we learned about the essential partner. The essential partner, the essential provider, every conversation they brought a gift. It usually was an insight, an explanation, a way of making the complex very clear, a way of making the complicated very simple. I want you to think about it this way. Most of your clients, they're really busy. That's the reason they're wanting to work with you, is to simplify their life, gain control over how they deliver all the work they have to do. I want you to think about this idea, ROA. It stands for return on attention. It's like return on investment for conversations we have with other people. In other words, you need to make sure that whatever attention they give you has a high return. Let me talk about a few ways you can do that. First of all, be a student of your game. Whatever your discipline is, marketing, creative, technology, customer success, sales enablement, localization, translation, whatever it is, continue to be a student, read books, understand the concepts, the stories, everything behind your practice so that you can better explain that to clients, especially as they need to better understand this space in order to become more effective in who they hire for the job, how they manage you for the deliverable, and how they talk about it to their peers. Years ago, I had the wonderful opportunity to go to work for Mark Cuban. I worked for Mark Cuban back in the late 1990s. It was his startup that he ended up selling to Yahoo. It created his wealth that led to him buying the Dallas Mavericks, investing in companies. Today, you see him on Shark Tank giving great advice to entrepreneurs. When I met Mark, he made a really big impression on me as a business leader because he was a voracious student of his game. In fact, when I met him in July of 1997, he had already read over 50 books that year, cover to cover, on every aspect of his business, which at the time was audio and video over the internet. It was later called broadcast.com. He believed that if you feed your mind, you can trust your gut when it's go time. But he also believed as we study the game, we become teachers of the game to our clients. That was a really big part of what I talked about in my first book, Love is the Killer App, How to Win Business and Influence Friends. I believed that as we gained knowledge with the intention of sharing it with our customers, we build powerful relationships, mutual dependencies, where they learn every time they talk to us. So guess what? They spend more time talking to us. So let me actually put this into action for you. In many situations, your client is posting a job and wanting you to focus on a deliverable, but there's always something behind the deliverable that you can help them understand. So for example, let's say that a client wants to hire you to design elements for a presentation that he or she is going to make. That presentation has a design focus, it has content, it might also have particular assets. As you help explain to them different choices they might make, say in color palette, or as you explain to them different ways they can illustrate an idea, the effectiveness of using a chart versus, say, a photo, as you explain to them your thought process behind presentation design, guess what? They learn how to be better at seeing effective presentation design. This not only helps them become better at their job, it also creates confidence when they deliver that presentation, and more importantly, it helps them develop a better rapport as they continue to work with you on other elements just like that. I'll give you another example. I was talking to an independent professional on the Upwork platform. I like to call them Upworkers. And he specialized in coding, computer coding, and in particular coding for blockchain deployment. He was talking to a retail customer who had a lot of stores, and the retail customer was curious if blockchain was a better way to manage their retail inventory, specifically where things came from, than the current system they were using, which was the traditional ledger. But the client really didn't understand what blockchain was all about. The client always equated blockchain with things like Bitcoin, but in fact, blockchain is an entirely new paradigm in coding that creates a much more trusted way of understanding governance and understanding transactions. So this coding professional developed an elevator pitch on how blockchain worked that made it crystal clear, very easy for the prospect to understand. So not only could the prospect grasp blockchain for this particular application for his company, he could also tell it forward, and by making the complex simple, he saw that independent professional as an indispensable fountain of knowledge on the things that matter most. So the final takeaway I'll tell you here is when you have that opportunity to have a live conversation with a prospect or one of your current clients, always bring a gift. Ask yourself, what are the areas that the client or the prospect could improve their knowledge of? What are things I could tell them about my craft, my game, that would help them gain a greater understanding of the bigger picture? And as you think about it, I do it all the time. I prepared for this speech with that in mind. You begin to have one little nugget of wisdom you know you can bring, and the more you deliver it, the better you get at it, so the more you tend to deliver it to the next prospect and the next client, and you will develop an inventory of insights that allow you to not only be a great freelancer, but a master teacher at the same time. One final piece of advice. Make sure, though, as you approach teaching, that you do so with a sense of humility. I always ask permission sometimes when I talk to executives. Can I talk to you about my theory of how brands are built, for example? I always go into these teaching conversations understanding there's things they know that I don't know, that I could learn a whole lot more from them. I'm not trying to be smarter than them. I'm trying to give them a gift. And if we approach teaching or sharing knowledge with humility, it is almost always accepted as a gift. Here's the third and final point. Be a connector of dots. This is really important for those of you that want to receive larger jobs, bigger roles inside your client relationships on the Upwork platform. One of the ways that you can connect the dots is learn how to step back and not just take an order to build a logo or take an order to do QC on a new website design. Step back and ask yourself, what is the bigger problem they are trying to solve? Because if you step back and see the bigger problem and consult with them on the larger issues that challenge them, you just may win bigger work, and guess what? You will be seen as an essential partner. To illustrate this point, I would like to bring in Dan Pink. I mentioned him earlier. He's a best-selling author of multiple books, but he wrote Free Agent Nation, which really ignited the conversation about the power of independent professionals like you in helping businesses succeed. Here's his take on approaching the higher order problem and how it can win you even more and bigger business.
If you are a designer and someone wants a logo, okay, so logos risk being commoditized now. So if someone's looking for a logo and you meet with them, you want to go in there knowing everything about their business, because it could be that what they need is not so much, the reason they want a new logo is that they aren't attracting the right kind of customers, and it could be that it's not a logo problem, it's a strategy problem, that they're in the wrong business. And so there's a huge premium on expertise, and there's a huge premium on surfacing hidden problems rather than solving existing problems.
This completely makes sense, doesn't it? I think about it a lot, say, from different services that I have in my life. When you talk to someone, say, that's in financial advice, they don't just talk to you about how to save money or invest money. They talk to you about the higher order problem. You're trying to plan for retirement. When a real estate agent is working with a prospect on a home, they're not just trying to sell them a home, they're trying to address their higher order problem. They're trying to relocate to a new city. So I just want you to always expand your thinking as you engage with your prospects and work with your clients to connect the dots, step back and see if you can be of even more value, and you just may win bigger assignments from them over the course of time. I hope this video has given you some ideas on what it takes to make this leap from being a good option to becoming an essential partner, because if you think about it, it's so competitive today to win business. Being a good option is not a winning strategy, but becoming an essential partner, it is the way you can drive your business performance on Upwork, and it's the way you can make a really big difference in the lives of the clients that you serve every single day. Thank you.